Well, I do have two after, Sheila. Do you want to go ahead and get started, or should we wait a couple more minutes?
No, Tyler,
I know our
time. Give them another minute or two to get logged in, or.
Okay, that sounds good.
And good morning. Are you guys able to hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm having issues with my video camera. For some reason, it's not wanting to turn on. So I guess I'm just going to be audio this morning, but appreciate you guys working together. And Elena, it's wonderful that you're taking the lead and leading today. So I'm excited to see this wonderful conversation. And Sheila, as always, thank you for taking the time to join us.
You're welcome. I'm excited about it.
Well, Elena, since this is recorded, and I know that we stick to a pretty tight schedule, do you want to just kick it off? And I'm letting you run the whole show, so I'm just going to go on mute. And if you guys need a phone, I am here to help wherever I can.
Okay, yeah, we'll just go ahead and get started. Well, thank you everyone who's on the phone. This morning we have Sheila Ketley with us this morning on another one of our series, Coffee with a Leader. Sheila is on the board for ACHE for IHAN as well. A little bit about Sheila. She is the Director of Lean Process Improvement at Goshen Health. She has served in this role for 7 years. Her previous healthcare positions include VP Support Services, Hospital Administrator, and Principal Advisor of Lean Healthcare Consulting. Sheila earned a bachelor's in finance and an MBA from Ball State University and a doctorate of healthcare administration at Central Mission University. Her doctoral research and dissertation focused on culturally and linguistically appropriate services in healthcare. Sheila has been a member of ACHE and IHAN for 15 years. She has been on the board of IHAN since January of 2021. Sheila and her husband of 35 years have 4 adult children and 2 grandchildren. So we will go ahead and start off with our first question with Sheila. Beyond that wonderful biography, Sheila, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I actually was born and raised in northern Indiana in a rural area. And have mostly lived in rural parts of Indiana most of my life, which I think gives me probably a little bit different perspective than people who are, from Indianapolis or larger cities. And so, I have that background. Like Elena said, I have 4 adult kids and 2 wonderful grandkids. But I probably have had a very different career path than most people have had. So my bachelor's degree was in corporate finance and financial institutions. So I started out working in that field. And then my husband and I moved our family to Mexico to be missionaries. And so we raised our kids there for a few years and came back to the US. And it wasn't until after I came back to the US that I actually started in healthcare. So my original career was in banking and corporate finance, and then did a little bit of a stint in manufacturing as a controller at a manufacturing firm before I came into healthcare. Which is kind of interesting because when I was in high school doing all those career classes that you do, trying to figure out what would be a good match, everything was healthcare related. I wanted to be a doctor, a pharmacist, a dentist, all of these different kinds of things. And the reason I kept choosing not to do that was I would look at how much schooling you needed, and you have to get this many years of a bachelor's and then a master's and then a doctorate, and you have to have this many years of all of your clinical time. And so I just kept thinking, like, that's a really long time, and I want to get married and I want to have a family and all of that. And so I went the business route, and then eventually it all came back together, and I went into a role in project management for a hospital in their IT department, which then moved me through the career path that Elena told you about, as being a vice president at a critical access hospital, and then moving to a hospital administrator position, and then going into lean consulting for healthcare, and now in my current position. So a long and winding road. And I think one of the things that I'd like to encourage people, a lot of times when you graduate with your bachelor's degree, you maybe don't really know all the opportunities that are out there for you, or where your path might lead you. And so sometimes as we start into our healthcare career, or we've had a year in healthcare and we go get our MHA and think all of a sudden we're just going to graduate and become an executive or something a year or two out of our MHA. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of time, and you have to navigate a little bit and find out what opportunities are out there in the healthcare arena, and where is a good fit for you. So maybe if you start out in patient access, that's not where you want to be for the rest of your life, or you start out in the hospital and find out that you really are a better fit in in the outpatient physician clinic world, or in the payer world or something. And so for me, it took me 13 years from the time I got my bachelor's degree before I really found my groove and decided healthcare administration was where I wanted to be. So
I think you're absolutely right, Sheila. I feel like a lot of people were so eager to graduate and get our first job, and then we start to feel stuck. So being able to understand that flexibility and take those opportunities, just like you said. So for our next question, do you have any fun facts that you can share?
Well, I'm a first generation college graduate, so the first one in my family to go to college. And so really kind of a funny thing is, as I mentioned that I kind of shied away from all of my original inklings of going towards healthcare because of the time commitment. You can see behind me everything on the wall, and Elena told you about all of my degrees. And eventually I did go all the way through and get my doctorate, but I finished my doctorate at the same time that my youngest son graduated from his undergrad. But the thing that I really told Elena I wanted to talk about a fun fact about my family, just kind of a weird thing. Having been born and raised in rural Indiana and spending most of my time in areas where it was very homogenous as far as race, ethnicity, religion, culture, those kinds of things. My husband and I have always been passionate about traveling and about really being open to just learning about different things. And we did raise our kids part of the time in a foreign culture. And so we have a very weird family structure between my 4 kids and my 2 grandkids and their spouses. So there's like 9 of them. 3 of them were born and raised in other countries and immigrated to the US, and 3 of them are first generation Americans. So I don't know what we did differently than other people in our area, but I kind of find it fun that we have a lot of that going on in our family. And I think that as we go through some of the other questions that Elena's going to ask me, there's kind of a thread that ties to that, and that's really where my passion is. And so yeah.
Yes, I think that that's amazing. The diversity within your own family, let alone everything else in the workplace or going to school, and like gaining that diversity. Yours is right in your backyard. So the next question is, tell us about a time that has shaped you professionally.
Sure. So this goes back to that same thread. When my husband and I were missionaries, we were living in a foreign country where we were the ethnic minority. We didn't look like the people that lived around us, and we didn't speak the language very fluently. And so clearly it was different than what I was used to. And during the time that we lived there, a member of our immediate family needed to have some health care, some testing, something that was, kind of a scare. In the end, it turned out everything was fine and it was great. But being able to experience firsthand navigating a healthcare system in a country that It wasn't my native language. I didn't know how the healthcare system worked. I didn't know where to go or how to get tests or how to get prescriptions, anything like that. I think that's kind of the thing that's shaped my professional career as a whole. Just looking at that from the eyes of the patients that we have, people that we have coming into our health system. Are we accessible? Do we have a way to help them navigate the system if they're not used to it? Can we help them with language? Are we being open to their cultural differences and understanding that, you know, in my particular culture, I handle these particular health situations in a certain way, and that doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means that they're different. And it may mean that if we don't navigate that well, then the patient may or may not be compliant to the treatments and the options that they have. And so that's always been something that I've carried with me throughout my entire career in healthcare. And I think I probably wouldn't have carried that through if I wouldn't have actually experienced that on my own.
And right, that ties into your dissertation decision.
Absolutely. So when I did my doctoral work, I needed to do a research dissertation. And so it was very easy for me to know from the very beginning that that's what my research was going to be about. So you may or may not be familiar that the Department of Health and Human Services has something called CLASS, so culturally and linguistically appropriate services in healthcare. And there's a lot of training tools and things online about that, about how we really offer culture and language within our organizations to our patients. And I just wanted to do some research to find out if critical access hospitals, because again, small, rural, that's where my background is. If we were doing a good job at that, it's easy for large academic institutions to be able to do that because they have a much greater pool of people to pull from, providers, workers, nurses, things like that. And in critical access hospitals, when you walk in the door of the hospital, a lot of people look and sound the same. And so that's where my research was do the people who work in our hospital reflect our community? Are the people that are on our board reflect the makeup of our community? Does our executive team reflect the makeup of our community? And I was able to work with the National Rural Health Association to get access to the leaders in critical access hospitals across the country and get feedback from a lot of them and do some research to find out where we were doing a great job and where we maybe needed to do a better job in rural healthcare. So
I think it's amazing how your firsthand experience has really been able to shape those next years of your life.
Well, and I think too right now, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I just think too right now, I did my dissertation probably, 10 or 12 years ago, and it's still so relevant today because, just the last 2 years, everything that's just out in the communities everywhere with the policing and just the Black Lives Matter and all of these different things have really just brought this to the forefront again. And I think that some of the mid-sized community hospitals, the smaller hospitals that really hadn't addressed it, that don't have Office of Diversity within their organizations, it's something that they're really starting to look at now. And so it's great for me to see that, over time, it still continues to remain a focus for healthcare organizations and that we're still trying to work better for that and to create better equity in the healthcare outcomes for the patients that we serve. So,
Agree. So our next question is, what change or impact do you want to have on our healthcare industry?
Well, besides the obvious that we've been talking about all this time, I think the other thing that I would say is, for me, it's training leaders. In my current role, I have an amazing opportunity in my department. So the way my department is set up, we do the lean process improvement facilitation for our entire organization. And so we get to go out into all the different areas of our organization and help them. And so my department is set up in a way that people come into my department either from the outside or transfer into my department within the organization. And they're basically on a 2 to 3 year mentorship and learning track. So not just learning about lean and getting certified in lean, but learning about how healthcare works, about how the hospital works, how the outpatient clinics work, how our surgical services, things like that work. And then I also am training them in leadership skills. So crucial conversations, humble inquiry, really how to do critical thinking, how to make sure that you're engaging everyone at the table and no one's being left out. And so they have 2 years of doing this, and they're learning all that, getting mentored, and then also working with teams and projects. And so the nice thing about that is they're seen in the organization, and it's really a way for them to get promoted up. And so in the 7 years that I've been in this role, I've had 15 people that have been in these positions that I've trained and I've mentored, 3 that are currently with me, and of the other 12, 11 of them have been promoted to a manager or a director either within our healthcare organization, or they've moved to another healthcare organization. Some of them, their spouse or someone has moved to a different city or state, and they've been able to come into those other organizations as managers and directors. And then I had one person who just opted out of that because they found that management wasn't really something that was a good fit for them. And so it kind of makes me excited to be able to shape new leaders that are going to be our healthcare executives in the future. And so that's really, I think, my impact right now on the industry, because they're not all staying right here in Goshen. They're moving and moving up. And so I think, for me, my big dream would be able to do that on a larger stage. But I get the opportunity right now to do that for the people that are in my department.
Okay, so everyone looking for a promotion, pack up and move to Goshen. No, that's a great opportunity, and especially for your organization to recognize the importance of, helping those at the lower level take that next step. So I think a lot of us in the early careerist stage of our life are looking to, how do we do that? Or what is our next step? How can we really find that balance of going to the next step? And it's just amazing to hear that Goshen gives that opportunity to some of those new upcoming leaders.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what I said originally in, sometimes when you first come out of that master's program, you don't really know enough about healthcare to even know where do I want to land. And so the nice thing for my team is they get to work with the inpatient units, they get to work with surgical services, they get to work with finance, revenue cycle, patient access, all of those different areas. And they're not working in those areas, but they're on projects, and they can see and they can hear and they can go shadow and do their observations, and they can say like, ooh, this looks like a place that I'd be really excited about learning more about. And so it kind of gives them that opportunity to see the world.
Yes, that sounds wonderful. Well, we are at about 9 minutes until the end of our session. I'm going to open it up. If anybody has any questions, feel free to come off mute or type it in the chat. And if not, we do have some backup questions just in case. I'll hold just.
Hey, Sheila, this is Tyler. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to throw you a curveball question.
Okay.
So there are a lot of students that are trying to decide between whether they want to go towards a rural community or more of an urban setting. I know that there's pros and cons to both. I, like you, grew up actually in the Goshen area, just south of you in Leesburg. So very familiar with that area and that market. But for those who have never been exposed to a rural community, could you kind of give some of the key differences? I know from my lens, I could give that, but you have lived this life a lot more than us, and that's why you're here to help us. for those that may be trying to consider whether they go rural or go to an urban setting?
Sure. So I think the difference is when you're in an urban setting, you're going to be in organizations that are much larger. So you're going to be in a multi-hospital system, most likely. And so you have in that situation and in that scenario, a lot of opportunity to really specialize in something. And so there's a great advantage there if you already know where you want to go, because you can really specialize in that one thing. Plus you've got, all the benefits of living in an urban area. But if you go with the rural area, what happens is you're in a much smaller organization. Most times it's a single hospital system. And so everything is kind of a situation where you wear all hats, you wear a lot of hats. And so it allows you, when you're in a rural area, to really get like the big picture of everything very easily. My first VP job, I was in a critical access hospital. So our average daily census was 3. We had 24 beds, but we had a lot of outpatient services. We had a pretty thriving ER. Our nearest hospital to us was about 20 miles away. So we were that first place that people came. And then we had to also really interact with a lot of other hospitals. If we had heart attack patients or stroke patients that we needed to get out, we had arrangements with other helicopter services to move the patients to where they needed to be, because we weren't a trauma center. We didn't have an ICU. But as a vice president in that, I knew everything about everything, which was great because it allowed me to really see how everything connects together, how a hospital works, all the way from, a person checking in, all the way through discharge, through the payer, strategic planning, everything. And I think, in a rural setting, you get that. The trade-off is you do not have a lot of, fun social activities and things like that. The other thing is, depending on the rural area that you're in, there's probably not a lot of diversity either, which is, something that you have to trade off if you're used to being in a large area. So I know, Tyler, I'd love to hear your perspective too on the differences, because obviously you're not up here anymore. You're down in the Indy area, and so
Yeah, and so I agree with everything that you're saying. I think a rural area is wonderful to get your feet wet on a lot of different topics and grow quickly and wear multiple hats, like you were saying, Sheila. The reason that I am not in a rural setting is I wanted to be more on the technical side and project management. And so life took me a different direction, but my heart is always with the rural community. And I think the biggest difference growing up in a rural setting is that it is a lot more relational than some of the interactions that you would have in a large academic setting. You still get to connect with patients, but as an administrator in an academic setting in a large city or a larger city, you have to be very intentional about volunteering and reaching out and being connected to that mission. Whereas in a rural setting, and Sheila, correct me if I'm wrong, you don't really have a choice. You are the administrator and you're walking the halls and you wear that hat when you're at the grocery store and you know the people at the gas station. I mean, that is just my experience from living in a small town, is that people know they'll talk. And so it's one of those that, yeah, there may be less diversity, but the relationship aspect of a rural community healthcare administrator is a lot more strategic and a lot more relational. Is that accurate, Sheila?
Absolutely, Tyler. So, I think about some of the TV shows about, a town that has one or two doctors in it, and everybody knows they're the doctor. That's really what it's like. My job as a hospital VP in the critical access hospital was in a town of about 4,000 people, and so it didn't matter if you were at the basketball game, the football game, the grocery store, everybody knew you were the hospital. And so no one was afraid to just stop you at the store or at the school or the ball game or whatever to tell you either a good or bad experience at the hospital that a family member had. And so it is very much, you wear that hat 24/7. So.
And I think it's a great opportunity for anybody who wants to grow quickly and move through various parts of the organization. I think everybody that we've spoke to on these series will advocate that as an early careerist, diversify. Get an opportunity like Sheila has talked about. Learn revenue cycle, learn that patient intake process. What does a day in the life of a bill look like? How do strategic initiatives work, right? How do you get your hands on those things? And so really reaching out to leaders like Sheila and saying, how do I get my hands on something like that? Or how can I sit in on that meeting? And how would you do this? So really being an advocate for yourself, whether you're in a rural or academic facility, and learning how to do those things. And that will just be more in your toolkit as you move forward. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you were done. I was just going to say, I think that is a perfect segue into why IHEN is so important to not only early careerists, but those of us who are a little more seasoned, is that you do have the opportunity to make those connections, because even within your own organization, I don't care, if you're at Eskenazi or IU or community or St. Vincent's, wherever you are, you don't necessarily know those people, but through IHEN, you can meet those people that are even within your organization, make those connections at IHEN events, and then say, hey, I'm interested in learning more about this. Could I come shadow somebody in your area for a day or something, where you may not have that opportunity to just, walk up to somebody like Chad Dilley and say, hi, Chad, you don't know me. I work over here in IT or project management, and I really like to do this. But, you make those connections and those relationships through IHEN, through the networking and those types of things. And that gives you that way to make that entry into some of those other areas that you might want to explore.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the key benefits of this group hosting all of these leader conversations, and just to help put some faces with names and be able to break down those barriers of being intimidated by approaching people. Well, I know that we are at time. Lena, I know you had a couple of updates on upcoming events. Do you want to share those quickly with the group?
Yes, just super quick. Today is the last day for early bird registration for our annual awards program. That will take place on October 25th from 5 to 6:30. Again, early bird registration ends today. And second is just as a reminder, if you know of any students who are looking into the healthcare track and want to join IHEN, we do offer the student associate scholarships if they meet the criteria. So just being aware of the early bird registration closing today, and then just spreading, the word to get more of our students involved. And, this is the perfect setting for students to listen in, and it's free, so why not?
Absolutely. And I do want to add one other event that's going to come up. Our next Coffee with Local Leader is going to look a little different. So we're going to make sure that there's some extra time in promoting it. But I have asked one of my executive coaches who coaches in the healthcare arena to join us, and she'll be doing a 30-minute session on some of the do's and don'ts of operationalizing your EQ. We leave college with so much knowledge, but then, how do we actually make change? And she also is going to be giving away a free 1-hour coaching session with her through just the registration. So make sure that as we get the link and stuff published that you guys register for that event, it should be a good conversation, just like today's conversation with Sheila. And Sheila, I just want to round back to you and say thank you so much for the time that you've dedicated to spending with us today.
You're welcome. I've enjoyed it.
So, Elena, you did a wonderful job, and thank you everyone for joining today.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheila. Again, nice to see you. I hope you have a great rest of your week.
You too.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.